We'll do it this way. My name is Peter Byck. I'm a professor of practice here at Arizona State University. I'm based in Tempe, but it's very cool to be here in Los Angeles, where I lived for 26 years. And today we are doing an anatomy of a documentary. We're going to learn a lot about the Holly. Julian Rubinstein's the director there. Do you go by Rob or Robert? Rob Gutierez is his lawyer, which is why he's not in jail right now. And Nani de la Pena is one of our key faculty members here in Los Angeles. I just found out she actually rides her bike to work from the west side. So I'm in shock right now, but I'll get my head together and I'll put it together. So we're gonna start, we'd like to start showing your trailer. Do you guys have that queued up to show the trailer for the Holly? And do you want me to talk for a little bit or you guys got that? You got it. All right. Thank you, sir.
I became a blood because I really, really loved my community. I didn't become a blood because I like wearing red.
Them days when he was a younger cat and he was protecting the hood, riding up and down the blocks, making sure that there wasn't no Crips.
There was a vacuum of leadership in the Black community, and Terrence grew up in that vacuum.
Nobody expected Terrence to come back the way he did after serving 10 years in prison. And then to come out and launch one of the most successful, not only gang prevention, but violence reduction programs.
That's what it's all about right there.
All Terrence had was a vision to stop the violence in the community.
It stood for peace, for community, and it was very profound.
What is the address of your emergency?
33rd and Holly.
Former gang member turned anti-violence activist Terrence Roberts is accused of opening fire at a peace rally he organized last night.
Telling police that he felt threatened and fired in self-defense.
Terrence was trying to save the neighborhood he came from. The city wanted to gentrify it.
I think he was making a lot of noise, and I think he was stepping on some people's toes that he shouldn't have. And some of these people have a lot of power.
Reverend Kelly has the key to the city when it comes to politicians and people that are in authority.
There is one Reverend Kelly. I feel like that godfather.
It's not good for somebody to get on my bad side, man.
Absolutely, I think he's been targeted.
I need y'all to take me to trial and fight for my life.
Somebody put a system together to destroy him.
Who's the confidential informant? Who's working for the police and who aren't?
You're going to expose a lot of powerful people. That's why your life is in danger.
I am not going to be afraid of nobody.
People have been told to not cooperate.
We look down at the end of the alley, we see two cars coming down real slow. As soon as they got on the other side of the dumpsters, they was firing. Pop, 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 pop. Can you see the tree right here leaking? As if it's bleeding or something.
Bullets are still flying in the Holly Shopping Center. Why?
If I was white, I'd be Captain America. But since I'm Terrence from Northeast Denver, I'm an angry activist.
If Terrence was born 25 years earlier, he would have been a Black Panther.
You looking at life in prison,
my words are getting me prosecuted, not my criminal actions.
It was either he died or the young man died. It didn't matter to those who orchestrated it who died. The goal was to make sure you stop Terrence Roberts from doing what Terrence Roberts is doing.
I love the Holly. I will fight for the Holly.
All right. Julian, I watched the trailer again, and I just am so floored by the access you had. And how did you get, or how did Terrence get you, or how did you get Terrence to collaborate like this, the lead character in the film? That's insane access for such an intense part of someone's life. How did you do that?
It was definitely challenging, and it was a process all through. In fact, you may remember there's a scene in the movie in which he threatens to cut my access off because of who I'm speaking to. It was a very delicate situation, but you know, when I first got involved, what happened was, you know, this shooting had happened. Here was a guy who was a well-known activist who had previously been a gang member and had gotten out of prison and gone back to his community and was now trying to eradicate basically the gang activity and the gang membership of his own gang. And so he was really, you know, in a cauldron there. And at a peace rally, he shoots someone, and there were so many different kind of things going on about questions of what happened, of course, but then also questions of really who was involved and what was behind it. That was sort of at the outset. And Terrence very much wanted to tell me his story because he felt at the time that the local media had really sold him out. And that really, of course, went in my favor. And of course, as a journalist, as maybe some of you are journalists here, or for other journalists who may be listening, of course, we really need people to trust us, but then we also need to maintain our independence in what we're doing. And that really was the tightrope that I had to walk with this. And there were, it was really a new day every day with it.
One more specific question, I'll absolutely bring y'all in. A lot of films these days, including stuff I'm working on, if the filmmaker's part of the story, the filmmaker's in the story. You're in there just little tiny bits. You give narration kind of where you need the glue, but you don't put yourself in it. We don't know how you're feeling at that point. We don't know, are you in danger? We didn't know watching the movie, are you in danger? But I'm going to ask you that in about 2 seconds. But why not put yourself, not that you have to, not that you should, but what was that decision-making process on the creative side of not putting yourself and your own wheels spinning concerns and things like that in the film?
Well, it started out that I really didn't want to be in the film, to the point where I would tell my DPs, who thankfully asked me and went against my words enough that we found enough footage later when I realized I really was wrong and I have to be in this to some degree.
You told them not to film you.
Well, they would ask sometimes. There were like 2 or 3 that I regularly worked with and all the time on this, because we were really filming extensively for at least 2+ years. And sometimes they said, do you want shots of you? And I would sort of say, not really. And my plan all along was that I saw this as like a verite film, and I didn't really want, especially being very aware that I'm a white guy doing a story in a black community, and I thought, I just want, the story's got to speak for itself. Later, and we can get into all that stuff too, that's a whole, other thing I've talked about many times, and just, for those listening, and most of my events actually that I've done, Terrence is with me, and I love that actually, because of course I want his voice to be heard, including how he felt about some of these questions you're asking me. We always get asked like about how do we, whatever, this thing, how did this happen or whatever, but it's later in the process, I basically realized that so many things happened during the movie that I was like actually right in the middle of, and that if I didn't give some context for who I was, so much would have been lost. And so I had to kind of, a little bit grudgingly at first, but kind of recognize that I needed to be part of this film. And so it was funny when you started asking the question, I didn't know, I don't know what you're going to ask, but anything you ask is fine. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because to me, I'm in it, not a lot, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but more than I expected, and I didn't know it necessarily felt like a little. So
yeah, just it's just what you choose to do. There's no right or wrong or anything like that. So you got an injunction about a week before your world premiere. Was that, and walk us through, actually let's bring in Rob to sort of give us the context of that injunction. And is that when you were brought on board? How did you even come in contact with this film in the first place?
It actually wasn't an injunction. What happened is they sent a letter to my dear friend Julian here, complaining about portrayal of 2 subjects in the movie. One is arguably a subject, the other is more of a witness. And they claimed that they were falsely portrayed in the documentary, accused falsely of taking
these were 2
cocaine.
members of Terrence's old gang that he was now trying to sort of marginalize.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And they threatened to sue for defamation. And Julian obviously is days away from the biggest film festival premiere, and he does what any smart documentary producer would do in that position, and he called a lawyer. And he had the interesting thing is, I don't know if we covered this, but the documentary is based on a book. And the 2 plaintiffs
that I reported and wrote,
exactly.
Concurrent art.
Yeah. And the claim was brought against both the book and the documentary, claiming that various things were falsely said about the two plaintiffs. And turns out that, at least as to the documentary, most of what they claimed was in it wasn't in it. And luckily enough, Colorado is one of the many states in the country that has what's called an anti-SLAPP statute. And what that is, it's a First Amendment respecting statute that allows defendants who are sued for exercising their right of free speech in connection with a public issue to, at the outset, file a motion to dismiss. Normally, you're all aware of how the legal system works. It can take months, sometimes years, to get your evidence before the court, before the judge. But because the aim of the statute is to deter lawsuits that are aimed to chill free speech, the defendants have an opportunity, if they can make the showing that they're being sued for exercising their right of free speech in connection with a public issue, to file a motion to dismiss. And what we did is called the plaintiff's attorneys and told them, this motion's coming down the pike. And in case you don't know, when we win this motion, and I'm confident we will, the statute allows my client to recover their attorney's fees from you. And by the way, how is it that you're claiming events A through Z are in the documentary? Have you seen the documentary? Dead silence. And we talked briefly about maybe allowing them to come to our Denver office to see the movie so we could prove that what they claimed was in the movie wasn't in the movie. And then we thought about it and realized, as a lawyer, you have a responsibility to file a lawsuit for good cause. You have to have some basis in fact and law before you just file a frivolous lawsuit. So we threatened sanctions, and within an hour of that phone call, they dismissed the case, which is almost unheard of. So I have to say, Julian, you got lucky there, but thank Colorado's anti-SLAPP statute for that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so it might have started with a letter, I guess, and I can't remember the exact order, but they quickly did actually file the lawsuit.
They did file a lawsuit, yes.
Yeah.
So Nani, have you had any experiences like this? Have you had to fight your way to have footage or characters in a project that you've done?
So I get up and do a little presentation about stuff, but I wonder if we have some other, discuss this a little more. Do you want me to go up and show some things? Because I definitely have.
Well, why don't we get you going in here so then we can all be in a same
all right,
conversation.
that's great, because I'm really interested to know who was the lawyer that was dumb enough to take their side to do this.
Well, that's a good question right there.
Yeah, I want to ask that question first before we go off. Like, who was their counsel? That
we tried to kind of figure out who they were. There were some guys in Colorado, probably the only guys they could find, and they may have intimidated these guys, or they may have had connections to the gang. Frankly, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I just think that we asked the same question, I guess, is all.
It's safe to say that they're not First Amendment experts.
Yes.
And I'm sure they're still not. In fact, they may have shied away from defamation cases because of this case. But it's a shining example of making sure that you consult counsel at the earliest opportunity, especially when there's some chance that your movie will be shut down or otherwise face some legal challenges before it even hits the screens.
And was there a possibility of some sort of paycheck for them out of this?
Oh, well, they were seeking damages.
They were seeking
damages.
So they got somebody to think, okay, this...
Yeah, but they were seeking damages.
Rich filmmakers, yours, parachute...
Right.
Which, if anybody works in documentary films,
there's
what
no
a joke
damages
that
to
is,
collect.
right?
Why don't you go ahead?
All right, sure. Let me leave this here. So, sometimes for me, I have to show stuff. So, I'm going to show a trailer of a project I worked on, and I'm going to tell you what happened.
Joining us live from Paris now is Jude Festera, who's a spokesman for Dow Chemical.
Today, I'm very happy to announce that for the first time, Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe.
This interview was inaccurate.
The hoax was an elaborate one. The prank knocked 3% of Dow shares.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a hoax. It's an honest representation of what Dow should be doing.
Louisiana officials are taken for a ride by some yes men.
The yes men? The yes men trouble the world pulling pranks at corporate events. My name is Fred. I'm from Halliburton.
My name is Francisco Guerrero.
I'm Northrop Goody. I'm with the World Trade Organization.
Rastus Ham is going to be speaking.
Ooh. Sick, twisted.
I say you're a liar.
My name's Mike.
I'm Andy. This is a movie in which the two of us fix the world.
You want something that's going to be able to save a human being no matter what Mother Nature throws at him. And so this is the Halliburton Survival Ball.
We'll be happy to take any questions. Without oil, at least 4 billion people would starve, and starving would become the new black.
Expecting the next knock at the door to be Dow's lawyer?
No idea what Dow will do. They threatened us.
I'm being... why, are you allowed to do that to me?
You get some idea of, imagine having to be their lawyers. Okay, so my job on this was I was early on working with journalists, working on docs. I got asked if I could help with archive for these guys, and these guys steal everything, right? Zero respect for anybody and anything. And so trying to work with them, with their archive, and putting together this film was extraordinary, because you have to get down to like literally the fraction of the second that you don't go over in order to end your fair use claim, right? So this was probably one of the most difficult and extraordinary projects I'd ever worked on, and it's worth going to look at some of their films because you will laugh, and every time you see a piece of footage, you know they did not pay for it. And it will inspire you to steal other things, I'm sure, but I would suggest you get a really good fair use attorney and an attorney on your side if you're gonna try to attempt what these guys attempted. So I went on to do a lot of immersive work, and some of you know I came from journalism and then went on to make many, many pieces using virtual reality techniques on things like LGBTQ homelessness. I worked for Cartier, did a piece for the Wall Street Journal, augmented reality, lots and lots of domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the projects that we did, we've been working on, is called Trashed. And it lets you go into the shoes of rock and roll artists who destroy hotel rooms, right? As Joe Walsh sang, I live in hotels, I tear out the walls, I have accountants to pay for it all, of course. And so in our investigation of possible stories, one of the ones we really wanted to do was Keith Moon's, from The Who, his birthday bash. Giving you an idea of, fire extinguishers were emptied in many of the halls, and the 5-tier birthday cake everywhere, and furnishings become airborne. Keith Moon was naked, streaking through the lobby. He knocked out his tooth, etc. And eventually, their Cadillac ends up in the Holiday Inn pool. Some of the images from that extraordinary night, right? So we asked if we could license their material, and I particularly was interested in this song.
Well, the young man ain't got nothing in the world these days.
But The Who said no. You cannot license our song. We don't want you to have our material. But luckily for us, we'd picked a song that was not written by The Who, but was actually written by Mose Allison. And therefore, we could find somebody else to be playing this track, but you're not really paying attention because you're so busy trying to trash a hotel room that it isn't actually The Who. And not only that, our wonderful fair use attorney said to us, you know what? You are actually transforming this material in a way that allows you to use it for fair use. And it's that transformation when you're making commentary on something, when you're investigating something, which will allow you to use things that otherwise are copyrighted, etc. Sorry, I need to go back to this. And then I want to talk to you a little bit more as we start to talk about nuance about what you can do or not do. And journalistically, there's a lot of very interesting questions being raised right now by using these technologies. So in this piece, it was with PBS Frontline. We slapped a 360 camera onto a helicopter, and we shot over Greenland. And then what we did is we took that footage and we wrapped it around a 3D model of a helicopter so that you're flying over Greenland. But as you will notice in this footage, there's no pilot. Now, Frontline felt very uncomfortable for us to have a 3D model pilot because they were like, then people will think we really shot it inside this helicopter, and how will that be ethical or correct, right? And more on that was, sorry, let me go back. The trailer of how the piece came together.
Well, when you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever. How could it possibly go away?
The glacier retreated more in the last 15 years than in the previous 70 years. We'd like to know why.
So one of the things we did is we scanned different environments, including the boat, and we also put you underwater so you could see how the oceans were warming. That's what makes virtual reality unique. We can literally put you underwater and understand that glaciers are melting from below from the heated oceans, which is why we're seeing these kind of sea level rises. But we also put you in this NASA airplane with this scientist, but he had to... 3, 2, 1, drop. So he had to be, he had to be shot on our stage in Los Angeles. The plane was scanned separately, and then we had to do what's called volumetric capture. We had to capture him on a big green screen room and then put him in the back of the plane, right? And there was a really big brouhaha at Frontline. Once again, he should not be wearing his jumpsuit, because if he wears that jumpsuit, people will think that actually he was filmed in the plane when he wasn't filmed in the plane. Well, he showed up at our stage wearing flip-flops and shorts. So we're going to put him in the back of the Antarctica plane in flip-flops and shorts. Really interesting moment. And the debates I had with them were things like, well, when you make documentary films, you put in B-roll all the time, and the B-roll might be a sunset that has nothing to do with the place that you're actually in, but you're creating a mood or you're creating emotion. So this, in a way, was sort of an interesting question about what is truth and when we're making content. Well, the NASA scientist was like, I'm not participating unless I get filmed in my blue jumpsuit, and so he got filmed in his blue jumpsuit. So these are just these interesting things to be thinking about as you're making content and nonfiction content and thinking about how things work legally. He was like, I'm leaving. And if we wanted him, we had to put him in the jumpsuit. So I just want to wrap up with a little quick trailer about why and what I do here now. I have been taking all this stuff and have been creating a really exciting program and center on narrative and emerging media in this building. So I'm just going to show you a quick trailer of that so you can see the kind of badass stuff we're doing here. Nope. Go.
Arizona State University is ranked #1 in innovation, ahead of Stanford and MIT for the past 8 years. Now, ASU is offering a brand new one-of-a-kind master's program in narrative and emerging media to create new narratives in augmented, virtual and extended reality, virtual production, and experiential media. Based at the new ASU California Center in Los Angeles, the program for narrative and emerging media is a collaborative effort between the Sidney Poitier New American Film School and the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. This program draws on the talent of the global entertainment capital of the world to drive innovation and inclusion for next-generation storytelling. The curriculum for this one-year program arms students with cutting-edge visual storytelling techniques taught by top industry innovators, including award-winning directors Nani De La Peña and Mary Matheson. Students explore the emerging media toolkit, learn about the marketplace, connect with the field's top professionals, and develop critical media project management skills to tell creative fictional stories or nonfiction journalistic work. Housed in the recently renovated historic Herald Examiner building, the ASU California Center was custom designed to include a state-of-the-art emerging media hub with a green screen studio for virtual reality and live broadcasts, a planar LED wall with OptiTrack and disguise systems for driving industry-standard virtual productions and immersive content. Here, students master methods for integrating values of equity and social justice into their research, while remaining mindful of the needs of communities impacted by their work, and ensuring diverse creators tell stories from their own perspectives. You can create your own future and reality right here by joining us at ASU's Master's Program in Narrative and Emerging Media.
Okay, I don't know why I'm having trouble with that. All right, that.
Awesome. Well, come join us, and we'll keep talking about stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys about E&O insurance, errors and omissions. Now, what is it? What's it for? How much does it cost? Does every documentary even know to get it when they start?
And every VR piece.
And every VR piece
Yeah,
as well.
too. Absolutely.
Chances are you want your film to be distributed. And more times than not, the distributor will want to see E&O insurance. Why? Well, Nani just told you about the fair use work that lawyers can do. The cautionary tale there is, though, just because you have a lawyer who rightly tells you that the law applied correctly would yield a result that something's not infringing, it's fair use, it doesn't mean that you can prevent someone from filing a claim. And sadly, frivolous claims are filed all too often, and the fair use doctrine itself is somewhat fuzzy at times because there are factors that courts can apply differently depending on how they actually perceive a certain use. And the important thing about E&O insurance is it covers you if you're sued. If you're sued for copyright infringement, if you're sued, in Julian's case, for defamation, and for the price of your deductible, you have the benefit of knowing that if you're sued, for the most part, the legal costs and any damages, hopefully that would never come to pass, the legal costs would be paid by the carrier. And so not only is it usually recommended, but it's also a very smart thing for a film producer to do.
And did you have to pay into your deductible for this event that happened?
So what happened with me was, as some people may or may not know, and I didn't, when you premiere at a festival, you actually don't have to have, not only do you not have to have, insurance, but you don't have to have your releases. You can even play music without releases. They're not asking for that. But even though I wasn't yet getting a distribution deal and I was only going to start out, playing in festivals, I knew that because of the type of story it was, I had concerns that I could face blowback, even if I thought I would win the case, by the way, which I did feel that I would, but I didn't want to have to, lose a lot of money trying to fight a case. So I got, insurance. It cost me about, I think it was around $3,000. It was for 3 years. And I decided to do that before I released the film, even in festivals. And I literally got it actually, the, thing in place, I think it was like days before or a week before at most the lawsuit was filed. So, and then I had a $10,000 deductible. I honestly couldn't even remember at first. I was like, how much is my deductible? And then I was lucky in this case because I had later in the game, Adam McKay, the Academy Award winner, had come on board as an executive producer to just sort of help get the film out there and in whatever way he could. And when I did, because my whole team had actually been sued and served papers, around the country, some of them at their homes and in Colorado where others were. And anyway, I had sort of reached out to everyone saying, well, I guess we're, I'm going to try to seek out help to get this $10,000, and Adam McKay promptly offered to pay it for us. So I fortunately I wasn't out any money thanks to the policy and then covering the deductible.
That's cool. Nani, have you ever been sued?
I have not been sued, but I recommend insurance. And I'll tell you, and also, good lawyers to help you. Having recently had a very bad fire, my electric bicycle battery exploded and burned everything down of all my stuff. And believe me, having my policies in place and having good attorneys to help us through, has been incredibly important. I will say I've always carried E&O, and it can be very expensive for you in the documentary filmmaking. It's just one of those things. I sometimes think that when you look at a budget, I remember when I first got somebody gave me their documentary film budget, and I felt like it was keys to the kingdom to understand how you actually make things. What are actual components that me struggling, thinking, I'm just gonna go make this nice footage and film, with audio and maybe get some music. You realize there's a lot more that goes into it. I also will have to say, I did a big piece for a fashion brand in Italy called GCDS, and it was for the Milan Fashion Week. And we shot it all using virtual production. So we built it all in the game engine, and we used, if some of you know Chloe, and then had to put Olympic animations on it, and then bring it in Unreal, and then it was just it was crazy. I had to get designers from literally around the globe who knew how to take their basic designs, bring them into this 3D software to make them three-dimensional, and then we had to animate and put them on character. It was really probably one of the craziest projects I've ever done. And we were in the middle of that when they came to us and said, you have to have umbrella insurance. So not only did we have to have an E&O policy, suddenly we had to have an umbrella insurance policy.
Which means what?
Why don't you answer that umbrella insurance policy? Because I just got it. You tell me what it means.
In a nutshell, if you've exhausted the coverage on your primary policy, umbrella's there to pick up the rest. So I highly recommend, and oddly enough, it's generally not that expensive. I don't know why. I'm happy that's the case for my clients, but everyone should have umbrella policies as well. It's not just producers, but you never know what's going to happen.
I'm taking notes because I've got a film about to come out next month.
So it's kind of like the secondary, Landy, but they required it. And again, I just described to you the intensity of this project, and our margins, I wouldn't even, razor thin, it sounds much healthier than we even were able to make this thing happen. And we barely launched this crazy project. Literally, we melted our computers the night before trying to process and render out this stuff, and I had to find somebody in Spain who was still awake, who was a different time zone, it was the middle of the night, to get them to render it for us. It was the craziest project I've ever done. But I was looking into maybe I don't need umbrella insurance anymore. And then my insurance agent said, well, you can only get umbrella insurance ever again if you have a contract saying you're required to get it. So then I'm on the fence, what do I want to do? But anyway, so I'm just saying to you, these are some of the things, as a creator, you have to think beyond, what you're making to also what you're producing, how to protect yourself, how to protect your project, and how to, if you want to talk about calamities and how do you protect yourself in that case, I want to say I'm your man, but that's not exactly what I meant to say. Go ahead.
Michael Moore's first film, Roger and Me, he's filming people that clearly did not say, you can film me. But they didn't walk away. And I was making a film just after that, my first doc, and we had someone who hadn't signed a release form. Everybody else had, but this guy hadn't. I really wanted him in the film. So I called Warner Brothers, and I got to their legal department. I said, how did you guys and gals, how did you all deal with this? Because clearly you haven't been sued, or if you have, what didn't make the press. And the lawyer there told me, and I talked to you about this the time we first met, it was a thing called acquiescence by decree, meaning that if they stayed there, they saw the camera rolling, and they didn't leave, then they basically said, all right. And obviously you can get sued for anything. Sacha Baron Cohen got sued with people who had signed release forms. Were you working on that? Or your firm did work on that?
My last firm did. It was a lot of fun, let me tell you.
And so have you heard the term acquiescence by decree?
Not that term. It's normally called, I think of it as an implied agreement. If you're in a public place, generally there's no expectation of privacy. Usually the carrier, carrier, or the producer will require you to have licenses. That's a smart thing to do. Why? It's really an insurance policy.
When you say licenses, what licenses do you mean?
Well, a release.
Release
A
form.
release. And what it does basically is if you say on Monday that you're more than happy to be in the documentary, but then on Tuesday you think back and I think I'm okay with it. Wednesday it's released. Obviously there's a very compressed time schedule. It's released. You don't like the way you're portrayed. If you haven't signed a release, you can sue. And interestingly enough, I'm going to have Julian explain how that worked out in his lawsuit.
And there's a couple things I think about with releases and implied consent and all that. And I was really actually regarding a different character or subject in the film who wasn't one of the two who sued. I also didn't have a release from a very important person in the project who you saw in the trailer, a guy who goes by Reverend Kelly. And
I was going to ask you about him.
And he even you can see the film, by the way, for those who haven't seen it. It's on Amazon Prime and Apple Plus and some others. But he is the guy's about 6'7" and was wearing a lavalier mic for us and everything. And I remember saying I had worked originally with another lawyer who was just dealing with the release stuff before Rob and I worked on the lawsuit. And I was saying, doesn't it count for something? I mean, the guy, if he didn't want to really be part of it, he obviously didn't have to wear a lavalier microphone and all that. And sure enough, there were a number of reasons why I was okay with it, even though on top of not having a release form from him and him probably, I knew, not going to like the movie, as he didn't, and he's kind of been among the group who've threatened me. I also had very significant content from him that I did end up using in the film and really wanted to, in which he was actually on the phone with me. And so what's the story with that? Of course, then you get into other laws. So there's a lot of things that govern fair use, though. But one was that he was a public figure. And for those of you, if any of you are a journalist, but if you're doing a film on a public figure, you're going to be in much better shape if you don't have a release. Like if you're doing a film about the mayor or the president or whoever, they just don't have a lot of expectation of privacy and they're public figures and all that. There's a lot of different, levels of it. But to get to the lawsuit, to also tell about that part, I mean, I guess to finish that, I did use everything from him, and it was because of a good fair use lawyer, by the way, who wrote a letter that went along with my insurance policy about who I had release forms from, who I didn't, and an explanation for, why, in her view anyway, that I was still not in danger of being sued or that we would win a lawsuit should he sue. In the lawsuit that did get, that I was served with, and the case that we were sued on was from two people, one of whom I did have a release form from and didn't actually I was dealing with so many questions that they were putting in there in the lawsuit about how I characterized them, which included, by the way, that they were active gang members. And I think it's even in the trailer that they're identified, and I identify them that way. And it wasn't that I didn't think about it and I thought, oh, well, they're just a gang member, I'm going to call them a gang member. It was actually very important to the story, because what was going on in the story that I discovered was that the person who had is at the center of the story, who shot someone at his own peace rally, he had formerly been in the position of the kind of like community leader in a federally funded anti-gang effort, who was doing the work on the ground and was in a paid position to do that. Well, after the shooting, it turned out that he was actually attacked on that very day by gang members, some of whom were working for law enforcement, and went on, right before my eyes and on camera, to be then hired and replacing the other guy who had just been shipped off, and he was seemingly about to go to prison for life for what turned out to be defending his life. And in his place, active gang members were hired to be anti-gang workers in a totally corrupt effort. And these were also people who made very clear every time I saw them, which was many times, and I knew them personally, they made very clear that I knew that they were active gang members. They wanted me to know that. They wanted me to be fearful of them. And so in the end, I felt, well, yeah, I'm going to identify them that way, because that's how they made very clear to me that's who they were, and it was absolutely important to the story that they were identified that way. Well, of course, it was one of the reasons that they sued me. They said they're not gang members, and I identified them as gang members, and that was defamatory. Well, it turns out one of them, as mentioned, had signed a release form, and that alone, and maybe Rob could pick it up there about how that changed the game. On his count, anyway, it was kind of like case over. You've already signed a release, and you're in the film. I think that was sort of.
It is case closed if you have a release. Going back to that same phone call where I asked if they'd seen the movie. I said, second question, do you know that one of your clients signed a release? Again, they had no idea. So I'm not trying to pick on lawyers, but I will tell you that the better lawyer will do his due diligence ahead of time, especially now that there's the anti-SLAPP statute. It's been around for many, many years now. But I guess I'm talking against my own self-interest here, but you don't really want to be filing frivolous lawsuits for defamation, especially if your client has the money to pay the attorney's fees that he or she will have to pay when they lose that case.
On the creative...
I just want to ask a quick question about releases and some of the techniques I see now that are not necessarily a physical signature. How viable is it if you film somebody and they give their release on camera? Is that as good as a piece of paper that's signed?
It's not as good, but we'll take it. I mean, oftentimes that issue arises where after the fact I realize that Sally didn't sign a release. And there's a certain inherent danger in after the fact asking for a release because it starts the wheels turning. Well, gee, I wonder what producer's concerned about or what he plans to do with my portrayal. And so sometimes you decide not to ask for a release after the fact. Sometimes you do, and they say no, and then you have to make the calculus. Is it still worth going forward without the release?
It is a calculation. I wanted to ask you, Julian, did the lawsuit affect the edit?
Well, it didn't actually, because the edit was really done, and we were putting it into the festival. I mean, I think we actually did it.
But folks cut their film after festivals.
Well, you're right, and I was just trying. I think we did do a tweak or something. We had done some minor adjustments, but I guess the short answer though is no. I didn't. I didn't change anything because of the lawsuit, and during it, now it was, Rob earlier gave a kind of obviously a condensed version of what happened, but they served the lawsuit right before this festival, and there was. I mean, by the time they dropped the case, it was maybe 3 or 4 months, at least, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 months. And during that time, it really it was pretty unsettling because even though the festival did let us go forward, they made me add them as an additional insured to the policy. And then they, after some, concerns on their side and mine, they had to talk to their board. They were concerned about if they would be drawn into the lawsuit. But they let it go forward, and we were able to continue to play festivals. But with that hanging over my head, I guess I wasn't sure what the outcome would be and if I might maybe need to end up changing anything in the film. I was pretty determined not to and didn't feel I needed to, but until it was resolved, I guess I didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
Now, you're winning in a legal situation, but you're dealing with people who don't necessarily follow the law to make up their mind on things. Were you worried for your life?
Well, I was definitely had safety concerns so the whole project was like really about 8 years end to end. And as mentioned before, I started out, I got a book contract, and it was really early on, right around the time when I actually got it, that I was realizing that I wanted to do a documentary because the access I had and because of what was going on right in front of me. So I was doing both projects, and throughout the process, or I guess sort of like, let's say, not that far into the process, it started to become, really clear to me that the people I was dealing with were not only very dangerous, but those very dangerous people were also the ones who were kind of in the crosshairs of what was kind of playing out, and I was starting to understand it, and that if I was going to really do my job, which I did intend to do, I am a journalist, and I was following a story that was becoming more and more significant or, revealing about many things. And so there was a time when I had to face, I guess, the reality. Like, I left Denver several times, I think like 6 different times, literally for a couple times, months at a time, because I was getting feedback. It wasn't direct at first, but I was getting like feedback about, threats to me and, kind of trying to clearly push me off, back me off. But it wasn't kind of overt, and it was kind of in the background. Then once the book came out and once this lawsuit came out, it became more overt, and there were actual threats, including on social media. And then actually, literally the day, no, it was a week or two after the lawsuit ended, and then the day that the film takes place all in Denver, and it was a very well-known project in Denver, and we won the audience award at the Denver Film Festival, and it was literally within an hour or two of that happening that one of these guys who was well-known to be the leader of the Bloods and, is all over the book and is a little bit in the movie, and he and another guy had filed the lawsuit. They lost the lawsuit, saw the attention it was getting in Denver, and he went on Facebook Live and did like an hour-long Facebook Live in which he openly threatens my life. And it was after that I was actually put in a Colorado state-funded address protection program to protect my life from people who the city of Denver and the U.S. government had hired to be an anti-gang activist. How about that?
How about that?
Yeah.
Nani, have you ever had your life threatened, or have you ever been concerned?
Okay, so this is a sort of ridiculous story. I was a correspondent for Newsweek. I started my career as a print journalist, right, and became a correspondent for Newsweek. And the way that the magazine worked in those days, and I was in New York, 444 Madison Avenue, I was the second youngest person they'd ever hired. I was super young, really. And there was a big cover story on Jamaican drug gangs. And I was covering the Love People disco in Brooklyn. And the Love People disco was having shootings every weekend. And I'd gotten, at that time it was DA Liz Holtzman had given me all the information, all the data on the shootings. And the way the Newsweek would work is you type up your report and as a correspondent, and it would go to a writer. And then the writer would read all the different reports from across the nation about Jamaican drug gangs in this case, and compile a singular piece. And then you would get what was called a readback Saturday morning, and you had to read it, make sure they were accurate before the magazine came out on Monday. I was very young. Friday nights in New York were a lot of fun. I was not my best on a Saturday morning. And the writer had written changed shootings to homicides. And I didn't pick it up. And Monday it came out, and the neighborhood marched and had the Love People disco closed. And on Tuesday at 444 Madison Avenue in Manhattan in New York, the security guards called up and said, "Hey, there's somebody here who wants to speak to you." "This is the owner of the Love People disco. Where'd you get your information from?" And I was like, dub, right? And he wanted to come up to my offices. And the security guards did not let him. But I can promise you that I was very nervous leaving my offices that day. Because, of course, he was so upset. I immediately went to the magazine. We issue retractions, but it's a little late when your livelihood has been shut down. I mean, at the time, I just was too naive to really understand the consequences of that kind of an error. It's hard to, if there's shootings every week, there's still some viable reason why this may not be the best institution to have on your block. But even still, the inaccuracy, I own up to drinking too much the night before. So there you go.
There you go. So I have a question about your film. The opening scene, I'm not ruining the movie for y'all.
Oh, by the way, I asked the security guard, what did that guy look like? And they're like, 6'3", big Jamaican guy. I was like, okay. Right.
Keep your eyes out.
That's right. Those are things to ride a moped around Manhattan. I had to get to my moped. Anyway.
There you go. Opening scene, Terrence kicks open a door to get his stuff. Why is his stuff locked up? Where is he kicking the door down from?
As soon as I filmed that scene, I was like, this is either a first or second scene in the movie, I felt, because for a lot of the time I knew him, well, I guess the whole time I knew him up to that point, he had, the shooting had happened. He was in this office right in this heart of this neighborhood and working on this program. And after the shooting happened, he was forced to resign, pushed out, was awaiting trial. He was out on bond, so he wasn't locked up. But he had told me that because I guess maybe I'd even asked, or he just said, but of course I was curious to, if you're filming something, you want as much stuff, you want to, let me see your stuff. What else? Do you have any old articles or who knows what? And all of his stuff was locked up. Where was it? Well, it was, he just was told that it was at this place because after he was basically, arrested and then pushed out of his position, he hadn't even felt safe to go over there, and someone had just packed up his office and thrown his stuff, actually at this other location, a YMCA it was. And so I knew, and he kept saying, I just really want to get it. And I was even nervous because I was like, man, if that stuff's lost, I lose so much stuff too, possibly, because he kept saying, oh, I have that, but it's all with my stuff. So anyway, I knew.
Mean that was kind of a filmed breaking and entering, that kind of thing?
Well, so what happened? Well, so I knew whenever he was going to get that stuff, I wanted to go, and like a lot in this movie, which was part of the reason I had to film even some of it, even though I didn't want to film too much of it because I wasn't as good on the camera as other people. But I was always had to be ready to go, and he told me he was going. We went over there, and sure enough, he got there, and it was the second time he tried, I think, and he got there, and for some reason, the guy who had the key wasn't there, and he was just like, I have got to get my stuff. And so I said, okay. So you do see at the beginning of the movie, we got it right on camera, he literally kicks down the door to get his stuff, and then it kind of kicks off this kind of interesting scene in which he starts showing some of the things from his life.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
No, that's an extraordinary scene. But did you all think ever that since these individuals were hired to be community organizers, that the individuals who were doing the hiring really didn't want your film to come out, I presume?
It didn't want the film?
Yes, but I presume if they were hiring gang members who were
accusing
somebody who was defending himself.
So he was a community organizer, on his own, and had this program and this organization, which was an anti-gang organization. Then he sometimes, and in this case, he also additionally had been appointed or hired to be like the community. I don't know. He wasn't an interrupter, but he was part of a law enforcement program that was trying to reduce gang violence in the neighborhood. And it turned out that he had become at odds in the couple years leading up to this. He was really at odds with the police over how to do the program, and but it was also a gentrifying community, and so there were all these other, and it was a very historic community that had been a big part of the city. So there were really almost across, just from law enforcement to developers to politicians and
to ex-gang members,
gang members, nonprofits, everyone in Denver who had like power and muscle. They all wanted a piece of this neighborhood, and some of them had a piece, some of them didn't. But sure enough, you're correct to say that as the sort of story kept unfolding, and there I was often, filming things, and I was also reporting the book, and had certainly gotten to know all these players. Yes, none of them seemed all very concerned about what this was going to be about.
Well, the reason I was asking that is I know you didn't figure out who backed the filing of the lawsuit against you. And whether there was some sense that maybe it could have been.
Yes, no, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer, but I have thought about that. I have a few ideas, but I guess I don't really know for sure. And all I can say though is, as you probably know, and Rob can say, like if you in their case, they probably didn't pay anything up front. And maybe convince these guys. I think they did believe that. It seemed like from the letter they were thinking, well, we were just going to settle. They were sort of hoping we were just going to throw some money at it and make it go away. Because they also, for example, sued my publisher. Of course, it's a New York publisher. Maybe the publisher's just going to say, just take $20,000 and just go away. We don't want to fight this. That didn't happen. So my sense was that they probably didn't put up maybe any money for the lawsuit, and then possibly left a bill that was unpaid, or the lawyers, expected to make some money. So I don't know if they needed a lot of money to get it started or not.
Because we were successful in having them drop the lawsuit before we filed our motion, we lost any entitlement to attorney's fees because we didn't have the hearing, obviously. But it didn't seem like such a huge loss for us because our chances of recovering any attorney's fees award given the two plaintiffs were pretty non-existent. But I wanted to ask you, Julian, there's a point in the documentary where Terrence, the main subject, starts doubting you. He doesn't want to talk to you. You're talking to the wrong people. How did you turn him around?
And let me, by the way, to finish that, Nani, because I think down the line of that is that not only did I, of course, wonder who was also connected to the lawsuit, but without a doubt, so there was like an ocean of falsehoods spread about the movie, me, the book, everything, and that was like clearly this big strategy of multiple sort of entities to undermine whatever was in there.
Wow, I don't know how you overcame this. Wow, what exhausting.
Yeah. It was exhausting, and it still is a little bit sometimes, but it's a lot better now. But yeah, it was a lot. And in order to deal with Terrence, which was an issue that came up again and again, because one of the things that filmmakers today do have to think about, and especially in a story like this, I was being actually, pressured almost, I felt at times, because I was white and it was a black community, and I should make Terrence a producer. And I just thought, God, I don't feel comfortable. Like, this is kind of an investigative documentary. I mean, it's very much a story. It's a narrative. It's verite and all that. It's not like, I don't know, like turn on 60 Minutes or something. But it was, I felt that this was a journalistic piece, and I thought it would just take away all credibility if I made Terrence a producer. So when he had got wind of that, sometimes he was very kind of interested in that, and I explained many times how I felt. And there was just this constant tension with us because, of course, I needed him, and he kind of needed me, but he did sort of use that threat sometimes that, well, if he wasn't sure about me or something, he was going to maybe just quit talking to me. And I basically just had to kind of call the bluff maybe or something and just do what I had to do, because I tried to explain to him that if I was going to do what I was doing, I had to talk to everyone. And I often said back to him, he sometimes said to me like, well, I have nothing, something like, he knows he's telling the truth and he has nothing to hide. And I said, well, if you have nothing to hide, then you're going to thank me later that I didn't make you a producer and that I did go and talk to everyone, because if I didn't, people would watch maybe the movie and say, well, great, well, what about the other side? But in this case, I tried to really do my due diligence. And by the way, I don't portray, it's not a hero's portrait of Terrence either, even though he sometimes wraps himself in the movie as its total vindication. I would say that it's partial vindication, and it's a nuanced portrait of him and of a community. But it was really, there was no one easy way to talk about it with him, and it was a conversation we honestly had so many times, and sometimes it was pretty rough, actually. And there were some times where we didn't talk for a few weeks or something, and we kind of came back together. He was in a very, stressful period of his life, obviously, and we just kind of managed to get through it. But there were times when it was hard, and I guess I wish I had a very easy piece of advice, but maybe just really be overly sensitive, I think, to your subjects, for sure, and about what they're going through, and just try to, I think mostly, really, you have to be honest, even though it seems like you kind of want to, couch it this way or that way because maybe you want to get through the conversation or whatever. But I didn't really do that because I felt like that wasn't going to, work. I would end up, whatever, that would haunt me. So I just tried to keep consistent about why I was doing it the way I wanted, that I felt it needed to be done, and why I thought it would actually benefit him in the end. And maybe that's how I got through.
Did the E&O cover the legal fees?
Yes, they did. Wow. Yep.
So
except for the deductible.
There's a bit of advice for everybody, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was. Thank God I did get it. Yeah.
If you learned anything today, do you all have any questions? Anybody have any questions in the audience? Nada?
Anyone?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
I didn't know that. I would have brought my kid. That's what our school said. Okay. Bring your child to work day. Yep.
So welcome. I am going to be shooting my first concert documentary.
Okay, here comes a mic, so you're going to just hang on one sec. Okay, start at the concert documentary. Yes. Should be on. Oh, he's gonna get it on for you in 2 shakes. Now it's on.
Hello. Still on. Okay. So I'm shooting my first concert documentary, and I've optimistically also written 8 episodes of a series that will culminate in the current day at this concert. So I feel like I need dual releases from the crowd. Robert, I guess I've been wondering, can I simply post signs that say, if you're here, you're going to be in both possible how much do they have to know about what they might be in?
That's commonly done, where you have this sign posted and it's basically enter and beware. More times than not, that can suffice. Every now and then I've seen claims brought where someone thought it was basically forced on them, and it wasn't a knowing acceptance of the appearance release. So I mean, it's hard to say. Best practice would be to get a release from everyone. That's not practical in this situation. So the thing to avoid is where you're actually focusing attention on someone, where they're readily identifiable for a prolonged period of time, especially if they're doing something that might be embarrassing. Your definition of embarrassing might be different from someone else's, but that's generally where you get in the most trouble, where they think it's a public disclosure of a private fact or it's an intrusion. If it's just being in an audience, the chances of it being relatively innocuous are pretty high.
Well, but she had 2 questions. She was, if she's going to produce 2 different types of media, a narrative and a documentary, is it okay to have that sign up, A? And then what I was going to say to you is, put a lot of them up and film them all as the people are walking. Record that you had them up.
That's great. And also, will that cover social media?
Probably not.
Okay. So how do we handle Facebook Live or pay-per-view, which is we're in discussions with?
We should talk.
Okay,
yeah, this is turning into a consultation.
I don't want to give legal advice in the course of this discussion.
Yeah, and I do have that one last question. Fair use has changed so much, even since when we did the Yes Men. It's 15 years later, and it was almost like this strict little second count of the time you could put in of, a clip that we used of somebody else's before it became too instrumental to your project, right? And I'm just wondering if there's anything.
Let me just break that down real quick. So you're saying that in the fair use law, as interpreted by at least your attorney at that time, you use 2 seconds of it, you're cool. You use 2.5 seconds of it, you're not cool. Is that what you?
That's right, and I can't remember what the exact second count was anymore. But that's exactly right. That literally we would be down to the frame in the edit room.
24 frames a second, 30 frames a second.
That's right. Yep. That's right. To try to make sure that we were under the legal recommendation to keep them from being sued. Because I promise you, they stole everything. They paid for nothing. They paid for absolutely nothing. And that was part of their MO, right? Frankly, I was sitting thinking, what? I don't know what's happened to them. Maybe some lawsuit did eventually silence them. I have to find out because I haven't tracked their career. And their activities were incredibly, incredibly disruptive. I mean, to pretend to be a Dow Chemical executive and get on the BBC live broadcast.
Fantastic.
Extraordinary, right? So I'm just wondering if there's any fair use changes, just 1 or 2 highlights. I understand you're not offering armchair legal advice, but just a little bit.
We won't hold you to it.
I want to start out by saying a lot of people seem to think there's this rule that if it's 5 seconds, it's fine. If it's 10 seconds, it's not fine. That's just not the truth. You can use an entire minute of something. I'd recommend against it, but there's no hard and fast rule about the length. It's normally about whether or not you've made a transformative use of the music. If you use no more than is necessary to make your point, if the amount you're using would act as a market substitute. In other words, would someone suddenly go to your work because they want to hear a song and that satisfies their desire for the work? Those are some of the many factors. Is it an educational use or is it a creative work? Is the work published or unpublished? If it's unpublished, it's going to be harder not impossible, but that factor will weigh against you when they're determining whether or not it's a fair use, because that would infringe on the right of first display.
So are you freaking out about AI? No. Are you freaking out about AI?
No,
because AI is like just not one big fat fair use sort of thing, right?
A lot of my clients are, and for understandable reasons, but as a lawyer, I think it's a fascinating time to be in this area. The laws will be adjusted. The way copyright law works is you adapt the law to what the current trend is. And when the law doesn't fit that trend, you'll have courts deciding how they think it should go. It doesn't mean another court will agree with you, but it's a growing field, it's a changing field, and it's an exciting time, but there are definitely some serious concerns on the creative side of people's images being used when they're not really their images.
Their creative works being mined and altered a little bit. Well, now that we're on a very small subject of AI and it's past time, why don't we let that be our only audience question? And I want to thank Nani, Rob, and Julian especially for bringing your work here. It's a phenomenal piece of work. The courage it took for you to, is it courage, stupidity? What, where is
right.
it? But the courage it took for you to tell this story, I think it's a very valuable story, and it is very nuanced, to use that word a few times, and I recommend to everyone to watch it. I just watched it Monday night, and it's still ringing in my head, which tells me it's a good piece of work. That's how I judge it. So does it still flash in my mind the day after, the next day, the next day? So the question is, where can you watch it?
I know that it's streaming on Amazon Prime and Apple Plus.
There you go. So thank you all. And thanks ASU, the California Center. This place is gorgeous. This is my second time being here. I've worked at ASU for 11 years. I love this building. And there's food. So let's thank everybody for being on the panel, and let's go eat.
Thanks.